Good morning, everyone. There is breaking news out of a federal courthouse in New York. I'm Megyn Kelly. Welcome to the Megyn Kelly Show, where Sean Combs has been found not guilty on the majority of counts against him and has been found guilty of only the two least serious crimes that he was charged with. There is little question that this is a defeat for the prosecution. The two counts on which he's been found guilty are transportation to engage in prostitution. There were two counts of it with respect to Cassie Ventura and Jane, who testified under a pseudonym, and he has been found not guilty on racketeering, not guilty on sex trafficking with respect to Cassie Ventura and with respect to Jane. Both of those sex trafficking counts required 15 years minimum in prison. The RICO count that he's been found not guilty of was a sentence of 20 to life, though it didn't have a mandatory minimum. So the sex trafficking ones were extremely serious, 15 years minimum. And he's escaped liability on both of those. He's escaped criminal guilt on both of those. It was going to be a miracle. It was going to be an obvious jury nullification if he escaped a guilty verdict on transportation to engage in prostitution. The evidence was overwhelming that he did that. There were receipts. There was testimony by the escorts. It was very clear that Sean Combs did pay these male escorts to cross state lines and to come into his various hotel rooms and have sex with his girlfriends, Cassie and Jane. And they had him dead to rights on that. I mean, he really should have pled guilty on those. And I've been saying all along, if they found him not guilty on those, it would prove that this has been a total nullification of the jury. He was a famous man and they didn't want to find him guilty because it's very clear he did those two. It is stunning that he managed to escape a guilty verdict on RICO, less stunning on RICO, but on sex trafficking, where the evidence was just overwhelming on the fact that he did threaten at least Cassie and Jane over and over again. He beat both women when they would not comply with his demands. But clearly what we're seeing here is the jury bought and believed the defense argument that these women had agency, that these women were not forced to do anything. The defense got up there and argued that they were swingers, that they were engaging in a swinger lifestyle, notwithstanding the beatings it took to get them to comply in certain instances. The jury clearly bought that. There was testimony that would be helpful for the defense. I don't mean to scoff at the conclusion entirely. There was testimony to support a not guilty, including text messages from Cassie Ventura saying, "I can't wait to freak off. I love our freak offs when we both want them." And testimony that Cassie stayed in part because she loved the lifestyle. She loved the trappings of life with Diddy. And Jane is still having her apartment paid for by Sean Combs to this moment. And there definitely could be a takeaway that Jane was in it because she wanted the apartment and she wanted to be connected with somebody famous and rich, and not because she had any fear for her life or otherwise, or retribution if she submitted. New York Times reporting here, caller from inside the courtroom. Sean Combs is smiling as he shook one of his lawyer's hands and turned again to look at his family. He put his hands together in prayer and mouthed, thank you at the jury. That's the right thing to say, Sean Combs. He pumped his right fist. Yep, this is exactly the right attitude for Sean Combs, who just got away with serious felonies, in my view. He's guilty as sin, in my view, and this jury just gave him a total pass. They bought Mark Agnifalo's argument, it appears, the same one that did not work for Agnifalo in the NXIVM sex cult case out of Albany, New York, in which he went in there and said, these women, we don't do sex cults. Women are powerful. Women make their own decisions. These women up in this other case chose to have themselves branded. No one made them with this guy's initials. And he tried the same thing here, but with a much, much better result. This is a win for Sean Diddy Combs. There's no question about it. The minimum charge or the charges likely on this particular count are far less serious. It calls for up to 10 years in prison. There's no way he's going to get 10 years in prison on these two, unless you have a judge who's very, very angry for some reason. We looked at the the federal sentencing guidelines, which are just recommendations. The judge doesn't have to follow them. He can go any place between 0 and 10. But we deduced that he has an offense level of about 26 points, which calls for a sentence of 5.25 years to 6.5 years in prison. The base offense level for this crime we deduced to be about 14. This is all on a sliding scale, plus you add another 4 levels because the offense may have involved coercion. Anyway, and then another 4 for causing another person to engage in a sexual act. So if they believe that, if this judge says that that's what happened, he could be facing 5 or 6 years in prison on each count. They would be likely to run consecutive, although it's possible the judge could say they run one after the other, or together, congruent. So we'll see. Likely to run at the same time is my view. There's no way he's getting more than 5 years in prison. But the sentencing won't happen today. That'll happen, I believe, at another hearing. I want to bring in Phil Holloway, who's been watching this case. You know him from our coverage of the Fannie Willis matter. He's a trial attorney down in Atlanta, Georgia. And Phil, you had been feeling and predicting that we were headed for a likely NG. I realize it's not a full not guilty, but anybody who tells you this isn't a win for Diddy is lying to you. This is an absolute win for him, and that's why he's pumping his fist and smiling today. Your thoughts?
Well, thanks for having me. It's always great to be with you here, Megan. Look, this is about many things, but at the heart of this verdict, I think, is reasonable doubt. I mean, all it takes for a jury to find someone not guilty is one doubt for which a reason can be attached. And if you have statements made by victims, you've read some of them in your opening just now, where these alleged victims had expressed a willingness and a desire to participate in some of these things. It is a very difficult thing for a prosecutor sometimes to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that despite those statements and despite that evidence, they are in fact victims. Okay. And so the jury is probably going to leave there thinking, you know what? He's a slimy person. He's a terrible person. He's probably guilty of all of these things, but the prosecution was just unable to prove to us beyond a reasonable doubt all the elements of the crimes as to the rest of the counts. And look, whatever the judge does give him in terms of sentencing, there's no parole to speak of in the federal system. And it's entirely possible that these are not run consecutively or concurrently. They could, in fact, be stacked potentially. And there's no reason to think that the judge is going to stay necessarily within the sentencing guidelines. It's very possible that the judge maxes out whatever is possible on what he's been convicted of. So for a man of his age, you know, even a 5 or 6 or 7 year prison sentence in the federal system is not insignificant at all. Now, I do agree with you. On balance, this was a win. He's already been in custody for, 10 months or so, I think it is now, and he will get credit for that. So for Diddy and for his team, there is something of a light at the end of his tunnel, but it's not over yet. The sentencing could still be relatively severe under the circumstances.
My team's informing me if there are no enhancements to the bare minimum sentencing under the transportation to engage in prostitution charges. One conviction on this charge would be 15 to 21 months. 2 counts, convicted under 2 counts, which is what he has been, is 21 to 27 months, so about 2 years. But we believe that there will be enhancements given the level that he was accused of coercion and so on. So we'll see. So we're looking at probably 2. I mean, it technically could be up to 10 years, but it's not going to be that because he has a criminal record, but he did not. It's not so great that he served jail for more than 30 days or got to the point where this would be held against him. In other words, they don't count his criminal history against him unless he was sentenced to more than a year of probation or 30 days in jail on prior offenses, and he wasn't. So it's as if he had no prior offenses. New York Times reporting that Mark Agnifilo, Sean Combs' lead lawyer, has asked that his client be released ahead of sentencing now that he is no longer facing sex trafficking and racketeering conspiracy charges, much more serious charges than the ones that he was convicted on. He's saying Combs is not a flight risk because he does not have access to his passport or his plane. This is his first conviction, he says, and it's a prostitution offense, and so he should be released on appropriate conditions, Agnifilo said. The lawyer is asking that Mr. Combs return to his home in Miami Beach, Florida. That's very interesting, and he's probably going to win that, I think. We'll see. Bringing in now Arthur Aidala, famed criminal defense attorney, but also has a history as a prosecutor back when he was younger. Just got off of the Harvey Weinstein trial himself. And your reaction, Arthur, to the breaking news that Sean Combs basically won this case, but for 2 prostitution counts.
It's a tremendous victory. And here's why I'm personally happy. The prosecutor who brought the case, Damian Williams, I don't think he was a good guy. I don't think he was a good U.S. attorney in the Southern District. I think his personal ambitions just clouded his judgment. I mean, he was going around telling people quietly that he was positioning himself to run for president of the United States. And he wanted to bring down Combs. He wanted to bring down the mayor of the city of New York. That was his ambition. And the conviction rates are so high in the Southern District that once you get indicted, it's over 90% when you go to trial. So this is a huge victory for the defense, for Sean, because there's no mandatory minimum. You know, you and I spoke yesterday. All these other counts, the judge, if he was his uncle, has to send him to prison. But that's not the case here. However, I don't think this judge is going to give him a walk in the park either. He's definitely giving him jail time. The judge is allowed to take into consideration all of the factors he heard during this trial, even the ones he was acquitted of. I was involved in a case where it was a murder case in federal court. The guy was acquitted of the murder, but there was a drug aspect of it that he was convicted of. He should have gotten 3 or 4 years, and the judge gave him the maximum with all the enhancements, and she's put on the record. I'm taking into account all the facts I heard about the murder. So Sean Combs could be home in a very short amount of time, or he could, you know, I think it's up to 10 years that he can be sentenced to. So if you're the defense attorney, though, Megan, you're very satisfied with the outcome of this case.
You're thrilled. You can't say thrilled
Yes.
because your client did get found guilty on 2 counts, but you're thrilled.
No, you're thrilled.
I mean, this is
No,
a
you're
huge,
thrilled. You're
huge
thrilled.
win. This guy was looking at life in prison if he got convicted on the RICO count. And those sex trafficking counts, 2 of them, one for Cassie, one for Jane, are no joke. 15 years minimum, required minimum. The judge,
Mandatory.
The judge has no discretion. So, that he managed to skate on both of those. This coming in now that the defense, again, trying to argue for his freedom pending sentencing. They suggested a $1 million bond. The judge had rejected that pending trial. They asked repeatedly to get Sean Combs out on bail pending trial, and the judge repeatedly said no. The government here vehemently opposing Sean Combs' release. The lead prosecutor, Maureen Comey, saying the defense is underplaying the seriousness of the conviction and is urging the judge to keep him detained. What kind of factors would go into that analysis, guys? Do you know? Like when the judge, you got a conviction, but it's 2 prostitution counts. I mean, they are felony counts, but I don't know. Would you normally detain a guy like this?
Megan, all I can say is this. If they put it forth, the same bail package that they have put forth, where he was going to have to stay in his house, pay for his own security, obviously have ankle bondage on, have no electronic devices in his house except like a landline, old school telephone to communicate with people, it would be so beyond the pale. It would be such an injustice for this judge not to give him bail under those conditions based on this conviction. If Sean Combs or anyone went in and pled guilty to this count, you would be looking at probably a non-jail disposition. You'd probably be looking at some form of probation. I don't think he's going to get probation because of the jail, the notoriety, and who he is. But he's not a danger to society under those bail conditions. He's not a flight risk under those bail conditions. He's no longer facing mandatory jail time. So the judge definitely should be giving him some sort of bail package.
Phil, right now, the New York Times reporting the judge said he needs time to consider the law before making a decision on whether Combs can walk out of the courthouse today. He's been incarcerated since September of 2024. I mean, how much time can the judge take here? He sends him back to prison. It's like, I don't know, how much time is he going to take?
if I can field that one, I have a little bit different take on it, Megan. Look, he no longer has the presumption of innocence, right? At least with respect to the charges he was convicted of. So there's no right to bail, like there might be arguably a right to bail in a pretrial situation, at least if you meet the criteria. In this case, the judge already knows whether or not he's thinking about sending Combs to prison for some extended period of time. And if he's going to send him to prison, there's no real it doesn't really make sense to go ahead and release him now. If he's going to be giving him some additional jail time, why let him out? Go ahead and let him begin serving that now. He's already convicted. The judge has heard all of the evidence of all of the terrible things that Combs has done during his life, and particularly with respect to some of these women, the domestic violence, the drugs, all of it. He's heard all of this stuff. And so if he is thinking, look, if I'm the judge and if I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to be sending him, let's just say it's going to be a 3 or 4 year prison sentence. I'm going to say, no, you're not going to get out on bail. You're going to go ahead and stay in custody. We'll sentence you next month. But that way, this time is counting towards the overall sentence. On the other hand, if the judge is thinking, okay, I'm going to let him out on probation, well, and if he lets him out on bond, then that could be an indicator that the judge is thinking about probation or some lower jail term. I don't think the judge is thinking about a bare minimum jail term, maybe not the maximum, probably something in the middle. And in my view, that would weigh in favor of keeping him in custody, denying the bail package. It doesn't do much good to let somebody go home to Miami Beach just to order them back to prison a few months later, at least in my view.
No, that's
that
a great,
sense.
that actually is a great point. And I will tell you from what my clients tell me, the hardest part about going to prison is going to prison, is actually those first days of, right now, believe it or not, Sean Combs has a routine. It may have been thrown off for the trial, but he knows all the people, he knows the guards, he knows the commissary, he knows the work. So he's in a relatively comfort zone as opposed to him leaving and then going back, which makes things more difficult. However, these charges in the world of federal criminal law are pretty minute.
Mm-hmm. It is a felony. It's not the same as like hiring a prostitute and like getting caught in a hotel room with her, right? Transportation to engage in prostitution as a federal crime is a felony with real jail time attached to it. So this is not that petty, Annie. It's not as small as it could be. But yeah, compared to the other charges he was facing, here's one other bit of color for you. New York Times reporting, this won't surprise you. Combs's body language is totally different from yesterday when he seemed crestfallen and grim after the jury said it had reached a verdict on 4 of the 5 counts. Now, acquitted of the most serious charges, Mr. Combs appears energetic and relieved. Can we just talk about, here's the picture, here's the sketch artist's picture of Combs yesterday, of the grimness, and I'm sure we'll get one today of him looking much more relieved. I'm so confused about, here's a little bit more, New York Times, with a touch of levity. The judge said he assumed Combs would not want to return to the Brooklyn jail where he has been held. Combs shook his head vigorously and put his hands together in prayer. Oh, it's all just so chummy inside the courtroom for this disgusting pervert female abuser who I can't believe is about to roam our streets again. I'm sorry, I'm disgusted by this verdict. This is fucking ridiculous. I just find it absolutely outrageous, the amount of crime that this guy just got away with. I believe he committed arson. He definitely battered Cassie. He battered Jane too. The statute of limitations for battery in Los Angeles and California is 1 year. 1 year. So if they didn't charge him for battery within 1 year, and they couldn't because he bought the tape and it remained hidden thanks to those security guards out there, then they could never charge him with that again. There's no question. He dragged her back into that hotel room. Why wasn't that kidnapping? They only talked about the kidnapping of Capricorn Clark, who was his sort of main assistant, because she said he grabbed her and made her go with him over to Kid Cudi's house. There's no question he broke into Kid Cudi's house, in my view, and that he opened up the Christmas presents and locked the door in and made a threat. There's no question in my mind he was behind the arson of Kid Cudi's car, and there was proof, plenty of proof to prove that. There was female fingerprints they found on that, the firebomb that was left there, the Molotov cocktail. And the prosecution said there's no question he didn't do it himself, but He said, I'm going to bomb Kid Cudi's car. It's in writing. Cassie Ventura emailed her mother saying, oh my God, he's threatening to bomb his car. And 2 weeks later, it got bombed. Oh, gee, it was just some third party who also had, it's just like the proof was there.
Yeah.
The beatings, the threats that if they didn't go back into those rooms and get off with these male escorts, that they were going to get beaten. The testimony from that Daniel Phillip, who was the male escort, who heard Combs abusing Cassie behind the door. And she was screaming, I'm sorry, as he heard him slapping her. Get back out there. She came back out. She was shaking. She got back into the escort's lap, physically shaking. She was so scared to the point where that guy couldn't perform sexually because this was so horrifying to him. What in the actual F went on in there?
So, Megan, let me just for 1 second, Phil, because let me just get Megan more pissed off, if I may. So if the judge gives him a reasonable sentence, let's say he sends him to 5 years, okay? And he's already got time in, and with a halfway house, he's out in 3. How quick is he going to be accepted back into that Hollywood scene, blah, 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 blah? Or do you think people will still keep him at an arm's length?
I mean, look, I will make it my personal mission to maintain his humiliation in the minds of all Americans. There's no question he's fallen as this revered figure for a large portion of America, but he also has diehard fans who want to pretend this is a Johnny Depp situation, you know, where he was wrongfully accused, that's my own view, by somebody who was out to get him, who played the victim when in fact she was abusive. This is not that situation. This is not. Cassandra Ventura was an extremely sympathetic witness who was not some powerful, I'm going to play Kid Cudi against Sean Combs. She was traumatized by this guy. She remains suicidal to this day, given all that was done to her. Listen to this. I almost don't even want to read these updates. New York Times, Sean Combs is now on his knees, his elbows on the chair where he was sitting, his head buried. He appeared to be praying. He started a round of applause, which was echoed by his family, who are jubilant. Yay, yay. We only have an abuser and solicitor of prostitutes in the family, not a sex trafficker. Sean Combs' supporters and family are now clapping and whistling for his legal team, who are all embracing each other. They actually did get a victory, and that's different. I mean, they should be hugging. Go ahead, Phil.
The judge is allowing that kind of thing in the court.
Yeah, I'm surprised about that also.
Yeah, what's that about?
Or maybe the judge is all back. There's no place in the courtroom for this because, look, regardless of whether or not you agree or disagree with the verdict, there's a certain dignity and decorum that's that's appropriate for courtrooms. And in federal courts, judges are famous for enforcing it, oftentimes much more so than at the state level. But look, back to your whole thing.
Well, this
Megan,
is a Biden appointee, so who knows about the dignity required. Sorry, keep going.
Back to your dismay with the jury's verdict. Look, juries are always wild cards. You got 12 people in there that come from different backgrounds, different walks of life. They have different political philosophies. They have different religious philosophies. They have their own biases, whether they say they can leave them outside the courtroom or not. They bring them in there and they analyze and they view things. And sometimes jurors are just stupid. Sometimes they're just dumb. Sometimes they're not capable of understanding the law or following the judge's instructions. So you factor all of that in there, and what you've got is a system where, guess what? After doing this almost 40 years, I have come to the conclusion that you cannot trust jurors to ever get it right, whether you're a prosecutor or whether you're a defense lawyer. Jurors and juries cannot be trusted to get it right. They get it wrong a lot. And that is what usually brings people to the bargaining table to come up with, plea deals like we have seen maybe in the Koberger case coming up today. But look, you just can't trust a jury ever to get to the right result. Sometimes they do, but a lot of times, unfortunately, they don't. And that cuts both ways for the prosecution and the defense.
I'm so confused on what the jury has done here. Like when you factor in the notes we got yesterday, Arthur, we get a note saying they reached a verdict on counts 2 through 5, but they couldn't agree on count 1, which was the racketeering conspiracy. Now we find out that at that time, we assume it didn't change, they thought he was guilty of the prostitution stuff, but they did not think that he was a sex trafficker who forced Cassie and Jane to perform sex acts under threat of coercion or fraud. And yet they were they were about to be a hung jury on the RICO count. Now, I don't get it. And then today, I guess the holdouts who said, I think he's guilty of RICO, this morning turned around and said, all right, he's not. He's not. Because they acquitted him of that. I don't get it, because how was there a juror who said he didn't sex traffic, but he might be guilty of RICO? I guess somebody was looking at the RICO statute saying maybe he did do the arson, maybe he did do the drug selling.
Right. The other predicate, right. There were other predicate acts that it didn't have to be the ones he was charged with. There were ones outside of the charged crimes that they could have said those were predicate acts, and therefore he's guilty of the racketeering. Look, I'm happy he didn't, look, I'm with you about who Sean Combs is as a person, but as someone who works in the system, this RICO law has really been abused as of late. And because from what his original intent was to what they're using it for now. So I'm happy that this didn't play out. Or maybe they were confused on, well, even if he did do some of the other predicate acts, is his business, which is music and recording and taking care of other artists and clothing and alcohol and all of this stuff, is that really a criminal enterprise, or is it a legitimate enterprise that Mr. Combs individually did some criminality with? So it probably got a little confusing, a little mixed up. I'm happy. Maybe this will have a chilling effect on prosecutors across the country to just be throwing these RICO counts around where they are not really deserved. But Megan, it also goes to, you never know what happens when a jury goes out overnight and they go home and they go to sleep and they think about it. And let's face it, the Sean Combs stuff is popping up all over everyone's phone, in the back of a cab. So who knows what they heard, who knows what they absorbed and what changed. But something changed really quickly, right? It's not like they were in there and it's 3:00 this afternoon. I mean, they came in, they must have taken a vote, and it was over.
No, and they were not sequestered, so they had access to their friends and family, and who knows how that went and whose input, if any, they took during that time frame. I want to say this, this just happened inside the courtroom. The court, the Times reporting, the court is adjourning for a few hours while the judge considers the arguments from Mr. Combs' lawyers and prosecutors about whether he should be released. Inner City Press, which is an organization that's been reporting on this from the beginning, says, yes, okay, that proposal, wait a couple hours, give me a couple hours, that makes sense. Mr. Combs does not want to go back to the detention center. He is shaking his head. So something about at 1 p.m. we'll convene, and I'll let the parties know. So I'm not sure exactly whether he gives the decision at 1 or they're just going to reconvene at 1.
Megan, what's happening right now is a very young, inexperienced judge is now going in the Southern District of New York, where there are literally judges there appointed, I think, going back to George H.W. Bush. There's definitely a bunch of Clinton appointees, meaning people who have been on the bench for 35, 40 years. And he is going to have his 1 or 2 mentors, and he's going to their chambers or picking their brain somehow or another and say, what do you think I should do not to embarrass myself? Because it always comes down to covering your own butt with these judges, in my opinion. And then that's how he's going to make it. He's not looking up any case law. There's no case law on this. It's his discretion. You know what the case law is? It's totally in his discretion. So he's going to go and ask Judge Lewis Kaplan, who was the one who tried the Trump case. He's going to go look at all these famous, the guy who just did the Menendez case, Judge Stein. Those are both in Clinton appointees. They've been around for decades. And he'll say, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And then he'll do whatever he thinks is in his best interest.
So what do you think before I toss? Yeah, go ahead, Phil. Yeah, you go.
He's exactly correct. That's what the judge is doing. He's just going back and asking another judge, what am I supposed to do under these circumstances? And I bet the advice that he gets is something along the lines of, look, do you think you're going to send him to prison for any length of time? If the answer is yes, maybe consider keeping him in jail. If you're not sure that you're going to send him to prison, maybe let him go on house arrest until you figure that out. Or maybe you already know that you're not going to send him to any significant prison, in which case, that would make sense to go ahead and let him out. But I think the best advice that any other judge could give this newbie judge would be that, look, keep him in jail if you think you're going to send him back to prison, because once you let him out, you're going to start getting all kinds of motions to delay report dates, to delay this, to delay that. And it's just going to open up a big can of worms that maybe you don't want to open. So if you're going to send him to prison, leave him be where he is right now.
And what about you guys? Does this even factor in the safety of these women? What about the safety of Cassie Ventura and Jane and Mia, who is another woman who testified against him under a pseudonym, but he knows very well who she is and who all these women are. And I'm sorry, but this is a man, I believe, blew up another man's car because he was dating Combs's girlfriend. I still have questions about how Combs's first wife died. I don't have evidence to show he killed her. She died of pneumonia, but it was very suspicious. And if you believe the draft diary, the alleged diary that hit YouTube, her friends, the dead wife's friends, believe he had something to do with it. He was involved in this, in shooting someone in the face in a nightclub, and that victim says he did it, even though another man went to prison for it, but that man is saying Diddy paid him off to take the rap. And we've heard weeks now, 7 weeks of testimony about how he's beaten these women to a pulp when he was allegedly in love with them, not when they were taking the stand in a federal trial against him, trying to get him locked up for the rest of his life. Does the judge consider that at all, Arthur, that he may be a danger if you let him out to these women?
It's the primary thing that he's going to consider. The two primary things are danger to society and risk of flight. And Phil's 100% correct. I mean, if the judge is thinking about keeping him and like sentencing him to jail time, and I've been wrong more times than I've been right. I'm going to be shocked if he sentences him to like time served and 5 years probation. But you never know. But yes, dangerousness, absolutely. That's why I think if he does let him out, I think he should severely limit his ability to communicate outside of his like lawyering and his immediate family with a landline phone that can be monitored. But if human instinct or common sense is going to play a role, I think it's fair to say that Sean had the life scared out of him, like literally the life scared out of him. Because this judge, if the prosecutor ran the table, I don't know if Sean Combs was ever going to see the light of day. So, if I'm his lawyer and I've been in this position where I've gotten people cleared of major, major crimes, and I said, listen, the only way I'm going to come and hit you in the head with a bat is if you ever get in trouble again. Because don't tell me I put my family aside, I put my life aside to save your backside, and you're going to do anything like this again. I imagine there's going to be a long-term relationship between Mark Agnifilo and Sean Combs, and Mark is going to do everything he can to make sure that Sean, at the very least, doesn't go and hurt.
His power is about to end. He's just a cog in the wheel of the Sean Combs empire. He's nothing to Sean Combs. He'll be grateful to him. He's not going to have ongoing control over Sean Combs. No one has control over Sean Combs. That's what we learned in this case, Phil, that the whole alleged enterprise was set up to treat him like he was God. There was testimony from, the one woman who worked for him that she was the one, she had to be available 24/7. She was not allowed to sleep with a lock on her door in his home, whereas all the male employees could, the security guards, they could. But her lock had to stay undone, and he would go in there, and she said, sexually assault her. I realize these things are complicated. Did she say no at the time? Was she overwhelmed that it was Sean Combs and she didn't say anything? Is that fair to hold against him if she didn't? Well, all that's complicated. My point is simply, everybody was there to serve Sean Combs. And the reason he's behaved with impunity for all this time is because everyone around him has let him. That hotel intercontinental security guard took the money. The head of security blessed it. He took 50 grand and he gave 50 grand to the underling, who then split his 50 with another guy. There was only one honest guy of the bunch who didn't take the money. The first guy on scene at the hotel didn't take the money, but did take out his phone and videotaped the hotel surveillance cameras because he said he wanted to show it to his wife, but I'm sure he had a little feeling someone else might take the money. That's the only reason CNN years later got this tape. And we and these jurors saw who Sean Combs really is. So it's just, I just don't, the lawyer's not going to have ongoing influence over this. Look at this guy, this thug. He's going to be thrilled he's out. And if anything, I feel like he's going to be feeling empowered that he's Sean effing Diddy Combs and he got away again with felonies.
But the judge could have control over him. I mean, I don't want to speak out of turn, but the judge may be able to sentence him to 5 years, don't count, consecutively, or 3 years of probation. He may be able to be on probation for 10 years, where, federal probation could be pretty intensive. You have to report once a week. You have to, they could go to your house anytime, unannounced. They can give you a curfew, whether the judge gives you a curfew or not. Some 28-year-old probation officer can tell Sean Combs, I want you home every night at 8 o'clock. You can leave at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I really only want you to do in work events. If you want to leave the jurisdiction of the Southern District of New York, which is basically the 5 boroughs and a little bit upstate, well, it's not even the 5 boroughs, but 2 of the 5, you have to let me know. So there are ways to keep an eye on Sean Combs through the federal system, again, which is no joke. It's not like it's a walk in the park. It can be if you're a good guy who's never been in trouble and obeys all the rules, and it was a money kind of case. Yeah, they can be very lenient on you. But if they want to keep their thumb on you, they have the ability to do so.
And those are the.
Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
So that's exactly the argument I would be making to the judge if I were his lawyer, trying to get him released and sentenced to house arrest pending sentencing, and then arguing for a probation. But look, unless a leopard can change its spots in the last 9 or 10 months while he's been in federal lockup, I think that for all of the reasons we've been talking about, that video and all of the testimony of how he has basically kept his thumb on these women and kept them oppressed and subjugated them and used them to demonstrate how he was all powerful and lording over every aspect of their lives. For those reasons, I think they are still at risk from him. Even if he's behind bars, they might be at some risk from him, in my opinion. And so I think that the better and the safer course of action, if you're the judge, is to leave him in custody, and then also to give him the maximum sentence that you can, because the judge really should not.
Can you talk about that, Phil? What do you think it would likely be if the maximum you could get for the transportation to engage in prostitution is up to 10 years in prison, and he's been found guilty of 2 counts, but has no criminal history that the court would look at? And he does have a criminal history, but it doesn't, as I said at the beginning, rise to a certain level. What would you expect the judge to sentence him to?
What would I expect, or what would I do? Because, if it were me, I would very seriously consider giving him the max, and maybe even stacking them for a total
20.
I would take into consideration all of the things that we've seen in this trial, whether it's something that amounted to a conviction or not. The judge sat there and saw it. And if the judge believed that that's the type of person he is, then the judge would be justified in believing that he is in more need of rehabilitation than someone who had not done all those things, even if they're barred by the statute of limitations in California. Now, what I expect the judge to do is to kind of maybe split the difference, because a lot of times we see that with newbie judges. They want to split the baby King Solomon type and say, look, all right, well, the defense wants him to go home and straight probation. The prosecutor wants the max. I'm going to do something in the middle because I want to be seen as being fair, because I'm still making my bones here in the federal judiciary. So I think I would expect the judge to do something probably in the middle.
What do you think?
I don't think that's out of the, and Meg, I can just tell you this. We're talking about the lawyering and all of that, and I'll make it a little personal, right? So the Weinstein case, right? We beat the top charge, but he's still facing basically life in prison because he's 73 years old with cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. But he hasn't been sentenced yet. If he gets sentenced to something where he can see the light at the end of the tunnel in 2 years or 3 years in New York, then you know what? I did my job, because I was handed a case that he was sentenced to 23 years, which was it was the death penalty. And I gave him an opportunity. If he could stay healthy in prison, he could get out. Of course, he's got to win the California appeal. The same thing holds true here. Although we all agree this is a huge victory for the defense attorneys, if the judge does what Phil says and says, I think you're a pretty despicable guy. You pissed in a woman's mouth until she was gagging. Like, I'm sorry, sir. I can't get that out of my mind. So I'm sentencing you to 10 years on one, 10 years on Cassie, because that's who you pissed in her mouth, and 5 on the other, and I'm running them consecutively, which means he's got to do like a dozen years. Then, even though the lawyers did the best they could, I don't think Sean Combs is going to look at doing 12 years in prison as a victory. So the book, the last chapter of this book has not been written yet.
When I know you got to run, Arthur, but quickly, when you get sentenced in federal court, do you have to serve the whole sentence?
85%. I'm pretty sure 85%. There's some stuff that Trump put in the first step back, but it doesn't apply to sex crimes. A lot of the ways to get out of prison early, we represent Ghislaine Maxwell. We're trying to at least get her into a nicer facility. We're not even asking her to be released, just to get her out of a maximum facility. But when you're convicted of a sex crime, a lot of the rules go out the window.
Okay, thank you for your analysis. I know you got to run. Thanks for doing this. All the best.
Thank you, no problem.
Great
My
to have
pleasure.
you. Phil, more coming in here. This is from the New York Times, what happened during the verdict. As the not guilty verdicts for the sex trafficking counts came, on which he was found not guilty, members of his family and his legal team began to cry. When the full verdict had been read, Mr. Combs turned to his family and mouthed, "I'm going home." And yeah, it may be. And then let me give you another piece. CNN reports that Cassie Ventura's lawyer, Douglas Wigdor, I know him well, that he gave the following statement. This case proved that change is long overdue. Cassie Ventura paved the way for a jury to find Sean Diddy Combs guilty on some of the counts against him. This entire criminal process started when our client, Cassie Ventura, had the courage to file her civil complaint in November 2023. Although the jury did not find Combs guilty of sex trafficking Cassie beyond a reasonable doubt, she paved the way for a jury to find him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. He continued, by coming forward with her experience, Cassie has left an indelible mark on both the entertainment industry and the fight for justice. Her exemplary courage throughout the trial brought attention to the realities of powerful men in our orbit and the misconduct that has persisted for decades without repercussion. I've got to say, the only part of that strikes me as real is the last one, where, yes, if she hadn't come forward, he wouldn't have been exposed. That is true. But it's a sweet lawyer trying to spin her courage in taking the stand as some sort of a win, and it just wasn't. It just wasn't a win. They barely believed anything she said, or if they did, they just didn't think it was a legal problem. They didn't think it rose to the level of criminality. They appear to have bought the defense's argument on Cassie, not the prosecution's, Phil.
Yeah, it seems that her words that she has used that expressed, and I'm just generalizing and putting it all together, her words that, whether it was text messages or other, that indicated that she was something of a willing participant, in fact, eager to participate in some of this. I can see, this is not my belief, but I can see how a jury might believe that this is a little bit of buyer's remorse by her, and that she sees things differently through the lens of hindsight than it really was when all this was going on. And we spoke about reasonable doubt. And if you're on the jury and the judge says, if you have a doubt for which a reason can be attached, it is your duty to acquit, then if the jurors are following those instructions, that means a lot. And if you're in the jury room and you say, look, well, I think he's a bad guy and he probably did, pressure her, but she made these statements and she expressed some willingness to be there. So according to the judge, this is a doubt in my brain and I've got a duty to acquit on that charge. And I think that's really probably the best way to explain it. And it's also true, by the way, that had she not been willing to come forward and testify, we wouldn't have had this trial and we wouldn't have the convictions that we do have. Back to what you were saying, I don't know who you said reported this, but somebody was reporting that he's waving his fist saying, "I'm coming home." That might be a little bit premature. And I don't know if his lawyers have maybe told him that, okay, if it's just these counts, that's a time served thing. If that's the case, he might be prematurely celebrating his release. I'm not so sure that's going to happen.
Right, because we're going to find out, we think, today around 1 p.m. what the judge is going to do, at least in between now and the sentencing. Like, how long does it normally take between the guilty verdict and the sentencing? Is there any chance? We have to do all the reports and all that. There's no way where he's getting sentenced today at 1. It's just about whether he stays in jail pending sentencing.
No, in the state system, a lot of times you can move straight into sentencing, but not. I don't expect that in this case. There will be a pre-sentence investigation, and it's entirely in the judge's discretion. But I'd say in roughly a month, give or take, they'll be back, maybe two. They'll be back for the sentencing, after which time the judge can take advantage of the reports that have been generated by the probation department, looking at not only the things that happened in the trial, but other things related to his background. They really do a deep dive and present all of it to the judge. And they actually might make a recommendation as well. It's not binding on the court. And you better believe that during the intervening time, both the prosecutor and the defense, they're going to be asked to submit something called a sentencing memorandum, which is where you lay out your case to the judge in writing as to what sentence you're seeking and why it factors into the guidelines and is supported by law. And those things, I would imagine each side may have already gotten a head start, at least drafting it or at least laying out the structure of it. But, that could be several pages long. Those documents can be 4 or 5 or 6 pages, or it could be, a little bit longer depending on the circumstances, but those have to be prepared, submitted, reviewed. So all those things are going to take several weeks to make it happen. As we've been talking about.
It's going to take a while. So I got to say this, today at 1 is going to be an epic moment in legal news across the United States of America, because we may find out, yes, this is interesting, whether he stays in jail pending the sentencing by this judge. And we are also going to hear Bryan Kohberger, we believe, say he is guilty of quadruple murder in Idaho, which will be on camera, and we will be showing it to the audience in full. So in our last minute together, Phil, your thoughts on the Kohberger plea?
So I am in the camp that the Kohberger plea deal is preposterous. I think that unless you've got all of the families on board with it, and that you've counseled with the families and you've got all of their support, and you've got a rock solid case. The evidence against him is overwhelming. I think the only reason to take the death penalty off the table and to take a plea deal is if the families were lobbying for it. I understand that the families here were split. Some wanted it, some didn't. And, I understand the reasons for why they might or might not want the plea deal. But if you've got a rock solid case and you don't have all of the families on board with it, I think the prosecutor should have gone forward with the trial and sought the death penalty.
So agree with every word you just said. Phil, thank you. Thanks so much for doing this. Arthur, goodbye, and thanks to him as well. We want our audience to stay tuned, because now we're going to turn to the Bryan Kohberger plea hearing. It's going to start at 1, and we are going to cover it in full, okay? To hear him say he committed these murders. We'll have that live on YouTube and on SiriusXM with instant reaction. See you then.